Put $430,000 into my husband's dream, and he didn't even save me a seat at the table. Let me back up. My name is Autumn. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've worked as a senior project coordinator at a commercial real estate firm in Charlotte. I'm not going to pretend I was some naive girl who didn't understand money. I grew up watching my mom stretch every dollar after my dad left, and I swore I'd never be financially dependent on anyone. I built my savings carefully, methodically, the way you build anything that's supposed to last. I met my husband, Theo, at a mutual friend's housewarming party in 2018. He was charming in that quiet, focused way, not loud, not showy, just steady. He had this vision for a wellness studio. Not a gym, he'd always correct people. A wellness studio, physical therapy, sports recovery, personalized nutrition coaching, all under one roof. He'd been a physical therapist for 7 years and he knew the industry. When he talked about it, his whole face changed. I fell in love with him and with the version of himself he became when he talked about that place. We got married in 2020. Small ceremony, backyard, his mother read a poem. It felt right. By 2021, he was ready to move. He'd found a location, a converted warehouse space in South End, one of Charlotte's fastest-growing neighborhoods. The bones were incredible. Exposed brick, high ceilings, good natural light. The landlord wanted a long-term commercial lease, which meant Theo needed to show significant capital to sign. He came to me with a business plan, spreadsheets, projections. I read every page. I asked questions. I took 2 weeks before I said yes. We agreed the funding would come from my savings, $430,000 total, covering the lease deposit, build-out costs, equipment, licensing, and 6 months of operating reserves. In return, my name would be on the LLC as a co-owner, 50%. We had a lawyer draft the operating agreement. I signed it. He signed it. I thought that meant something. I took on extra projects at work that year to replenish what I'd spent. I skipped the vacation we'd planned to Sedona. I said no to my sister when she asked me to go in on Mom's birthday trip. Every financial decision I made for 18 months pointed back to that studio. His mother, who I'll call my mother-in-law because that's the only title she ever cared about, was involved from the beginning. She had opinions about the logo, the color scheme, the name. Theo let her weigh in on everything. She'd stop by the space during build-out and walk around like she owned it. Once, she rearranged the equipment in the front reception area while the contractors were on lunch. I found out from the project manager. She didn't mention it to me. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was his dream. She was his mother, and my role was to support, not to compete. The studio was called Meridian Wellness. I thought the name was beautiful. I still do, actually. Some things you can't take back just because they got complicated. By late 2022, construction was winding down. The place was starting to look real. The treatment rooms had that calm, neutral palette Theo had obsessed over for months. The equipment was arriving in pieces. The signage had been ordered. I drove by after work sometimes just to see it. I felt proud. Not in a loud way, just quietly, deeply proud. Theo started talking about the grand opening in the fall. We'd discussed it casually. A soft launch first, then a bigger event. He mentioned catering, a photographer, inviting some local press. I started making a list in my head of what I'd wear. Then November came and I noticed something shift. He stopped mentioning the opening around me. When I'd bring it up, he'd say things like, "Still figuring out the details," or, "It's not going to be a big thing, don't worry about it." Don't worry about it. I filed that phrase away and tried not to read into it. The first week of December, I came home from work on a Thursday and he was on the phone in the kitchen. I heard him say, "Yeah, Saturday at 7. Bring your wife, it'll be a good time." He hung up when he heard me set my keys down. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just a colleague," he said. He was already opening the refrigerator, his back to me. "Saturday at 7. What's happening Saturday?" He paused. Just for half a second, but I caught it. "I told you about this, the soft opening for Meridian. Just a small thing. Some people from the clinic where I used to work, a few vendors." I stood there in my coat. You didn't tell me about this. I'm sure I did. You've been so busy with that Henderson project, I probably mentioned it and you forgot. I hadn't forgotten. There was nothing to forget. This was the first I was hearing it. Okay, I said carefully. So what time should I be there? I can leave work by 5:30 and go home to change first. Autumn. He turned around. It's really just a professional thing. Vendors, a few colleagues. My mom is helping coordinate. It's not the kind of thing where you need to be there. I remember the refrigerator was still open behind him. Cold air drifting out. I'm a co-owner of that business, Theo. I know that. But this isn't a party. It's a networking event. You don't know these people. You'd be bored. I'd be bored. I sat with that sense for a long time after. I didn't go Saturday. I told myself I was respecting his process. That maybe he just needed to handle this part on his own. That married people don't have to be attached at the hip. I went to my sister's that night instead and pretended everything was fine. She asked how the studio was coming along and I said, really well, almost open, and smiled like I meant it. I found out later, through a mutual friend who'd been invited, that it wasn't a small networking event. There were over 60 people there, catering from a restaurant I'd been trying to get Theo to take me to for 2 years. A photographer. My mother-in-law stood at the door greeting guests. Someone gave a toast. Theo spoke. The mutual friend sent me 3 photos without realizing what she was sending. I looked at those photos for a long time. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made myself a cup of coffee and stared out the window until I felt something settle in my chest. Not calm exactly, more like clarity. I didn't bring it up that night, or the next day. I waited until Monday, when I knew we'd both be home in the evening with enough time to actually talk. I cooked dinner, something I rarely do anymore, but I needed my hands busy. Pasta. Simple. When we sat down, I said, tell me about Saturday. He looked up. It went really well, actually. Good turnout. Got some leads from a sports medicine group. 60 people, Theo. He put his fork down. There were 60 people at the opening of the business I funded. Your mother greeted guests at the door. Someone gave a toast. And you told me I'd be bored. I didn't think you'd care about the networking side of it. I don't care about the networking side of it. I cared that I wasn't there. I put $430,000 into that building and I found out about the opening from a photo my friend accidentally sent me. You're being dramatic. I set my fork down too. Am I? Look, my mom put the guest list together and she thought it would be more professional to keep it industry focused. It wasn't personal. And there it was. His mother had put the guest list together. His mother had decided I wasn't on it and he had let her. Your mother decided whether I was invited to the opening of a business I co-own. Autumn, I want you to hear yourself right now. He didn't say anything. I finished dinner, cleaned up, and went to the bedroom. I didn't cry. I think that surprised both of us. 2 weeks later, he called me at work on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of reviewing a contract and I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Hey, he said. So I got the invoices from the build-out contractor. There are some final charges we didn't anticipate, scope changes from the last phase. It's about $38,000. I need you to transfer the funds by Friday because they've already sent the overdue notice. I set my pen down. Theo, I know it's more than we planned, but the changes were necessary and the contractor won't release the final lien waiver until... Do you remember what you said to me 2 weeks ago? Silence. You said the opening was for close colleagues and professional contacts, that I wouldn't know anyone, that I'd be bored. This is completely different. That was about the event. So when it's time to invest money, I'm your business partner. When it's time to be in the room, I'm not professional enough to be there. I never said that. You didn't have to. I heard him exhale. Autumn, this is not the time. The contractor needs the money by Friday, or we go into breach and the lien stays on the property. This affects both of us. Then I suggest you figure it out, I said. My money is for people who consider me close enough to be in the room. I'll see you tonight. I hung up. I want to be honest about what happened after that, because I know how this kind of story usually goes. The cathartic phone call, the satisfying hang-up, and then everything resolves neatly. Real life is messier than that. He came home that night furious. There was a real argument. He said I was using money as a weapon. I said I was finally treating money the way he'd been treating my presents, as optional. He went to stay at his mother's for 2 nights. Those 2 nights were very quiet. While he was gone, I made some calls. I'd already been in contact with the business attorney who had drafted our original LLC agreement, but now I started asking different questions. About my rights as a 50% owner, about what would happen if I requested an audit of the business accounts, about the process for formally amending operational authority. What I found out was clarifying. Because my name was on the LLC and I had documentation of the initial capital contribution, I had standing that Theo and his mother had not fully thought through when they'd started making unilateral decisions. The attorney was very matter-of-fact about it. She said, "You have more leverage here than you may realize." I sat in her office on a Wednesday afternoon and thought about the woman who had stood at the door of a business I paid for, greeting guests I hadn't been told about, smiling at people she'd decided outranked me. I thought about Theo's voice on the phone, the urgency about the contractor, the assumption that I would simply transfer the money because that's what I always did. I made a decision. I requested a formal financial review of the LLC accounts. I was entitled to it. Theo's attorney, he'd gotten his own by this point, advised him to comply. The review took 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, we were civil to each other in the way that 2 people can be civil when they both know something important is in motion and neither one wants to say the wrong thing. What the review found was not criminal, but it was illuminating. Several operational decisions had been made without my sign-off that should have required co-owner approval per our agreement. Vendor contracts, a secondary equipment lease, a consulting agreement with a sports performance company signed the week before the opening event I hadn't been invited to. His mother had been listed on 2 of the documents as an advisory consultant with a nominal fee attached to both. My attorney looked at me across the table when she walked me through it and said, "Do you want to continue this partnership?" I thought about that question for longer than she probably expected. The truth is, I had loved the idea of Meridian. I still believed in what it could be. But I had spent a 1.5 years quietly stepping aside, swallowing my opinions, letting someone else arrange the furniture in the space I had paid for, and convincing myself that was what good partners did. And in return, I had been left off a guest list. "I want what I'm owed," I told her. "And I want the terms of this partnership to actually mean something." What followed was several months of negotiation I won't walk through step by step, because it was exhausting and repetitive and involved a lot of documents I never want to look at again. The short version, we reached a formal agreement. My ownership stake was restructured to reflect the actual capital contribution on record. Operational decisions above a certain dollar threshold now required documented co-owner approval, in writing, in advance, no exceptions. The consulting agreements with his mother were not renewed. And the $38,000 contractor invoice, that came from the business operating account as it should have from the beginning. My mother-in-law called me once during this period. She said she hoped I understood that she had only been trying to protect her son's professional reputation, that she hadn't meant to make me feel excluded, that these decisions had been made with the best intentions. I told her I appreciated her calling. I told her I was sure her intentions were good. And I told her that going forward, the best way to support her son's business was to let the people whose names were on the LLC handle the decisions. She didn't have much to say after that. Theo and I are in couples counseling now. I'm not going to tell you everything is repaired because it isn't, not yet, and I don't know if it will be. What I can tell you is that we're both showing up to the sessions, and we're both saying things we should have said 2 years ago. That's something. Meridian Wellness had its official public grand opening in the spring. A real one. Event planner, local press, community outreach. The guest list included physical therapists, wellness coaches, a few city council contacts, some neighbors from the South End Community Association, and me, standing at the door. Not because anyone put me on a list, because my name is on the building. There's a moment I keep coming back to, standing in my own kitchen, still in my coat, watching my husband close the refrigerator door like nothing had happened, cold air drifting out, him already moving on to the next thing, and me holding a question I already knew the answer to. I think about that moment a lot now, not with bitterness, but with the kind of honesty that only shows up after enough time has passed. Because the truth is, Theo didn't do something to me in one sudden betrayal. It happened slowly, in all the small moments I told myself weren't worth bringing up. The rearranged equipment I didn't mention, the guest list I assumed I'd just be added to, the decisions I let slide because I wanted to be the kind of partner who didn't make everything a negotiation. I was so focused on being generous that I stopped paying attention to whether the generosity was being received with any real respect. What I've learned, and I mean actually learned, not in a motivational quote way, is that doing the right thing isn't enough on its own. Being willing to invest, to sacrifice, to show up quietly without needing credit. Those are real qualities, and I don't regret having them. But integrity without self-awareness is just a different kind of vulnerability. You can be a genuinely good person and still let yourself be slowly edged out of your own life if you're not paying attention to what's being built around you while you're looking the other way. That's the part I had to sit with. Not just what Theo did, but what I allowed by staying silent. By filling in the gaps and assuming the best and telling myself I was being mature. Some of that was genuine. Some of it was fear. Fear of being seen as difficult, as demanding, as someone who made their husband's dream feel like a transaction. I didn't want to be that person. So I made myself smaller instead. When I finally stopped doing that, when I called the attorney, when I requested the financial review, when I told Theo on that Tuesday afternoon that my money was for people who considered me worth including, it wasn't an act of revenge. It was just clarity. It was me deciding that the same intelligence I'd applied to every financial decision in that build-out deserved to be applied to how I was being treated inside it. The outcome took months and a lot of hard conversations and documents I never want to read again. But what stayed with me wasn't the restructured ownership agreement or the consulting fees that didn't get renewed. It was the simple fact that I had held on long enough, clearly enough, and steadily enough to get to the other side of it without burning everything down. That took something. It took knowing what I was actually worth, being smart enough to understand my position before I acted on it, and refusing to fold just because the situation got uncomfortable. I'm still married. I'm still in that process of figuring out what this marriage becomes. But I stood at the door of that studio at the real grand opening in the spring, and I was there not because anyone remembered to put me on a list, but because I had made it impossible to be left off one again. That's the thing nobody tells you about moments like this. They don't fix what hurt, but they do show you exactly who you are when it matters.